hopping back onto this Pokemon series, and while these next two installments aren't exactly mainline games, they are still very important milestones within the overall Pokemon franchise. Aside from providing us with a little bit of nostalgia, I think they also give us a lens into some interesting character design, aesthetic, and style. So let's talk about Pokemon Colosseum and XD. Hola, my name is X, and I like to experiment with fashion as well as talk about whatever the hell I want on social media whenever I feel like it. And in this video, I'm going to give you the top 7 things that you need to know, or you might just want to reminisce about the Pokemon Colosseum and XD Gale of Darkness games. Just some interesting kind of fun facts to contextualize these installments, just so we're on the same page. And along with that, I did want to touch on a little bit of insight or kind of research around the Orre region, really more so focused on the aesthetic and inspiration and how that kind of sets the tone for the overall style and vibe. Then we'll move into talking about what I would consider the most notable characters from these installments as far as their overall kind of like aesthetic importance or just style. I'm not going to go through every single character. This isn't a complete retrospective to cover all the nooks and crannies. But before we hop all into that, I do have a shout out to give to Paper Mache coming through with a second super thanks. Really appreciate the support. Love the thoughtful comment as it relates to what specifically I'm talking about in the video. People love to get excited and share what they'd love to see next, but it's always so entertaining for me to kind of see what others think as far as what I'm covering and if they share any same opinions, and always appreciate when people recognize the kind of styling effort I put into my outfits for the videos. I hope you're supporting your favorite creators, especially small creators, because every little bit goes a long way in this YouTube game. But nevertheless, I appreciate all of you who continue to subscribe and hype up the channel. It really does mean a lot, and I hope you enjoy the video. All right, now let's get into the top 7 things that you really just need to know to contextualize Pokemon Colosseum and XD. First and most obvious is it's a departure from the typical gameplay we're used to from the mainline games, and it was absolutely refreshing at the time. I remember loving Pokemon Stadium, but it just felt so stagnant in that there was no other kind of larger story surrounding it, and the mainline games kind of got a little rinse and repeat, even though it was still pretty novel at the time. But Colosseum came through. We're still going up against a villainous team. We're still battling Pokemon, but the mechanics were just a bit different with the whole snagging versus catching concept. The protagonists came from a different background and just had a different path throughout this journey within the Orre region. And just the overall tone just felt more edgy, which was so interesting at the time, especially for a growing and developing Pokemon fan like myself. And along with that was the emphasis on double battles. I remember when this was introduced in Sapphire and Ruby. That's another reason why I loved those installments so much, on top of a few others. But the double battling system is a complete game changer, for better or worse sometimes, because it adds an amazing layer of strategic rigor that is a bit more beyond just the one-on-one. And even though that can get kind of annoying because you really have to think ×2 with regard to what the opponent is going to do, and it really was inescapable in these games. Like, it really was the main gameplay and mechanic style, but that just made it so much more interesting, so much more challenging. And I just love the concept of working alongside someone else, or just being able to use more of my Pokemon roster to perform a number of different tactics, strategies, etc. Speaking of challenge, the introduction of Shadow Pokemon was certainly an interesting twist. I think I loved it more than I hated it, because it was just a unique way of approaching not only leveling up your Pokemon, but also having to catch them, because you had to snag them instead of just the traditional catching Pokemon in the wild. And I think the purification system was also a little bit of a pain in the butt, because it just was almost like a little bit of a daycare situation, but it did add a new kind of approach that you had to take to the gameplay. And I like just overall the narrative concept of it. It's not like you were trying to stop the villainous team from accomplishing their objective. they had been done close the hearts of these Pokemon, and you had to do what you could to bring that to a close, as well as rescue Pokemon from the situation. So that was just a nice introduction to the overall kind of gameplay style for Pokemon. Piggybacking on that unique aspect, there was unique storylines and protagonists here that made me just feel like I took a step out of just being a child for a second. Typically, we follow the protagonists when they're these little preteen kids fresh out of like school or something or recess, and they're just going on a random adventure to become a Pokemon master and stop some villainous teams in the process. But especially Wes, I would say, was the most interesting, as he was part of Team Snag'em originally, and now kind of focuses on bringing that Cypher organization to a close. It just was a different type of point of view. And you start, I just have to go on this. You start Pokemon Colosseum with an Espeon and an Umbreon. Like, no little starter intro Pokemon situation. Like, you're starting with two bad bees right out the gate. And just going on that adventure, meeting different types of people through these different types of cities and locations, that's just a bit out of the ordinary, was so refreshing. I will have to use that word over and over and over again. I felt immersed, I felt engaged, and it was just a nice break to help me even better appreciate going back to more of the traditional formatted Pokemon games to follow. Michael was cool too, but I definitely am a little bit more biased towards Wes just because he really brought a new aesthetic to the Pokemon franchise. On that note of aesthetic, these character designs are noticeably different than what we typically get from Pokemon. Synonymous, definitely relative and within vicinity to it, but it was a nice step away and innovation, I would say, even in the design. Talking about Wes again, hyping him up, just that more rebellious, edgy style that he had was so interesting. I saw a lot of people trying to liken this to Yu-Gi-Oh! I mean, I would say Wes is maybe the best avatar in order to make that comparison, but when we look at the characters overall, which we will a bit later, they definitely resemble other games that I think resonates a bit more objectively, kind of with my lens. Think Jet Set Radio, that came out I believe in 2000. There's even like some characters that look like Space Channel 5, which came out in 1999, but it just further highlights how distinctive and unique and differentiated the aesthetic, style, and fashion and character design was within Colosseum and XD. Kind of circling back to the shadow Pokemon thing a bit, there was limited available Pokemon to really explore, catch, and track within these installments. And to be honest, that was one of my least favorite components. I totally understand the shadow Pokemon concept and just like the overall framework and mechanics of Colosseum and XD, but part of what I love about Pokemon is being able to discover new sets and new species and the vast collection, and to an extent trying to catch as many of them as I can. And while you do have the kind of idea of trying to catch as many shadow Pokemon as you can, just the fact that you just can't go into certain areas a bit more broadly, that felt a little stifling, but it does kind of focus you more so on the narrative and the overall kind of path that you need to take with regard to the game and how it's set up within Colosseum and XD. And obviously further extends to that strategic layer because you don't get to just choose from an abundance of different Pokemon to enhance your kind of approach or your strategy. You need to really be methodical, calculated on which limited combinations you could best take advantage of to go against your opponents. And I think a final point is just to highlight and acknowledge, like I've done with other media and franchises, is that there is a legacy behind these games and there is a cult following. I'm not a full-blown cult member, but I'm definitely a diehard fan of these games. I would love if there was some sort of reinvention or like refreshment or redesign or just continuation of these games. Like, it doesn't have to be the Cypher team. It doesn't have to be in the Orre region. Give us something new. Give us something different, but give us a bit more of that mature, interesting angle and edge, something a bit more rough and tough, and that just breaks us out of the typical norm. I love how Pokemon has evolved to give us more open world. I thought kind of Legends Arceus was a little bit more innovative, and I think that Scarlet and Violet tried to build on that, but like imagine that framework, but then you just throw in some Colosseum and XD style, vibe, energy, storyline, like that would just be so much more engaging, especially as a significantly more mature Pokemon fan. So many of us out there that just want a little bit more from the franchise, and I think that tapping back into what really was a novelty in the past could give us something so much more refreshing. Great, now that we've gone over those 7 main talking points, want to move into discussing a little bit more about the Orre region and its overall aesthetic, style, and vibe. Part of why there's such limited Pokemon available is because Orre region is a harsh, arid landscape. It's very desert-like, lots of rocky, dry terrain, sparse vegetation, which isn't the most conducive to Pokemon thriving and surviving. And that's what also lent a unique aesthetic and vibe to the Colosseum and XD games, because we're used to much more lush and vibrant and abundant regions across the various games within the Pokemon franchise. And part of this is due to the fact that the Orre region drew some inspiration from the American Southwest kind of aesthetic and vibe, whether that be like the sandy desert terrains, canyons, mesas. Even with regard to the towns, there's a bit more of a rugged and rustic vibe, which we also see extends into a bit of the dress and style of the characters within the region too. But what's also interesting is, in contrast to a bit more of that rugged and rustic aesthetic, are much more advanced technological facilities and hubs sprinkled throughout the Orre region, which kind of lends a little bit of like a cyberpunk edge and style and fashion, because we even see that a lot of the characters dress as if they're in some sort of like cyberpunk dystopian reality. Whether it's the Cypher Key Lair, the Real Gam Tower, or even the Undercity, these areas highlight that technology is a significant component to the Orre region. It's not just living off the land. There are some places like Agate or Agate Village that kind of draws a little bit more of that kind of down-to-earth, almost Native American kind of indigenous style and vibe that make me a little more indicative of the American Southwest and something natural to the region. But it's really that technological component that gives it such an interesting twist as well, that I think was what also just made it feel so unique and new compared to a lot of the more traditional structures and aesthetics we got from the mainline games. Another thing that makes the Orre region a bit more distinct is that it's essentially a haven or a hub for criminal activity. Like, it's not just a matter of preventing criminal activity from happening, like it's part of the land and part of the kind of tone of that region. A little Wild West, which I think also makes a great connection to a bit more of the kind of American Southwest vibe. So we can naturally see that, especially in places like Pyrite Town, come through in more of that rugged, kind of rebellious, edgy style, which also is what makes this feel a little more kind of mature and interesting. And all of those different components or concepts, I think, are what contribute a little bit of that dystopian energy and kind of theme that we get from the Orre region. There's a lack of abundance of wild Pokemon running about, which alludes to the environmental challenges that the region faces. The prevalence of shadow Pokemon exhibits how advanced technology in the wrong hands can lead to abuse and misuse, and the consequences of such an ethically and morally ambiguous society. But then we have the juxtaposition of a desert, desolate landscape and a futuristic atmosphere, which just underscores the tension that can result from tradition versus progress, which are very key elements or components to a dystopian idea or story or concept. I could go on and on and on, but I feel like that covers what I like to more so focus on, from aesthetics, visuals, design, fashion, style, which I think sets us up pretty well to move into this next section, which is taking a look at some of the most notable characters from Colosseum and XD that I remember, that I appreciate, and I think definitely represent this discussion pretty well. So of course we have to start this off by looking at Wes, the icon, the legend. He's absolutely a Yu-Gi-Oh! Like avatar, just with the long dramatic coat, a bit more sharp edge to his hair, to his style, to his accessories, platform boots, giving us a little bit of that kind of punky, rebellious style. And he even has like some nice texture to his design as well. He just looks so cool. And the fact that he had an Espeon and Umbreon right out the gate, like easily one of my top favorite Pokemon characters of all time. They don't make them like this anymore. And kind of part of the double battle concept was you got to go along with like a partner, and Rui was his partner, and I just loved that she was trailing along throughout the adventure. It just makes you not feel so alone, especially when like you're a single player. And her style is so early 2000s, like obviously. Just such a cute skirt, shirt, and jacket moment. Not too over the top, but very well put together and designed. Her pink boots are super cute, and even her hairstyle just screams that era. So I just love her, and as a decent contrast to Wes's style, but they both really are great avatars for that decade. Gunzap, as far as villains are concerned, I almost didn't want to cover him, but I just think that he was just so distinct and really stood out to me, and I easily recall him. Just amazing body confidence. I love the kind of fitted vest style with a little bit more of like the baggier pants and shoes. It's just a big bulky character, and I typically don't always like these, but I just think that his simple but stylish design was actually well done. Then I wanted to touch on some characters that are kind of pedestrian, but really highlight the Jet Set radio idea. We have Britt, who definitely was giving roller skate Jet Set in Colosseum, but then had a simple but nice evolution in XD. The outfit is a little more elaborate, but not too over the top. I love when evolutions have a little more detail. Same thing with Silva, and if anything, his might have gotten a little more simplified, but it still just gives a little more elevation with how well coordinated the items are. And I think just the additional detail we get in the cuffs and the shoes is what makes it feel a little more mature. And Pear also looked very Jet Set in Colosseum, but then just has a bit more layered, very colorful style that we see was also pretty common in the early 2000s. And I just really love the different components. Like a tank over a shirt like that is so that era. And I love his purple pants. A little extra bits just to make his outfit more interesting. And Makan is a character I wouldn't talk about, but he was more behind the desk in Colosseum. And I think that he kind of lost a little bit of his edgy, unique overall kind of body framework, but his outfit looks just so tight and so fresh. A nice bucket hat, cool print to the shirt, the way that the colors pop against each other, simple, but really makes a statement. And then I definitely wanted to highlight Willie because I feel like he's a great model even and ambassador for a bit more of that American Southwest style. I mean, you could see it just in the shirt. You could see it even almost what looks like the chap style pants, like, and I would assume maybe even cowboy boots underneath that. Very Western, just very of that aesthetic. Then we get into Mayor B's crew a bit, and they have very similar style, but just in some interesting differentiated ways that I think are cool to highlight. Folly and Trudely obviously look very similar, more so just from the kind of goggle and pants and shoes standpoint. I like Trudely's better just because we're getting more detail. The long sleeve shirt that's navy blue is a great compliment to the orange vest that he's wearing, and just even wearing an interesting hat. Might have a cool hairstyle similar to Folly, but at least we're getting some additional accessorizing in the mix. Folly, love the body confidence and the fact that maybe we're getting just a bit more belt detail to prevent him from looking too flat and slim silhouette wise, but there's just really not much else going on with him. I'm recording this over again because I thought that Wreath on the left was wearing a scarf and she wasn't wearing a vest, but they're pretty much wearing the same outfit composition or a very similar one. But I think I like Firma's better just because her color palette resonates a bit more with me. The purple hair, the pink bodysuit, and the blue boots just really have great cohesion. And I like that she's wearing like a gray, silver, white vest and belt. And even though Wreath has a little bit of a crop top moment, I just like Firma's long sleeve shirt better as well. But they have great tall boots, simple, cute, coordinated, well put together. And then we have Gale, who I think almost kind of blends the two aesthetics together. Like, he has the goggles, but they're not on his face. And he has almost like a similar hairstyle or like framework as Wreath and Firma. And then, but the outfit is a bit more his own. And I feel like all of their style is very much giving Jet Set, particularly Folly and Shrewdly. But even his kind of does. It just looks like it's sporty, it's a little futuristic. Akeem is definitely an interesting design, and I think also almost kind of highlights a little bit of that American Southwest, maybe more of the Native American twist, because his style just feels a little more tribal, for lack of a better way to put it. I'd say just with the kind of necklace that he's wearing, a little bit of the face kind of design, and even just like the cloth around his waist, a little futuristic, a little kind of cultural inspired. Obviously loved Venus's style, and she almost reminds me of Caitlyn. I forget, was that from the Unova region that we recently discussed? It still is pink, it's ethereal, but the dress feels a little more elaborate and decorated, and just with that interesting almost kind of like lunar piece behind her gives her a little bit more of that extraterrestrial, outer space, psychological vibe, playing up a bit more of that intrigue and mystery. NASCAR was a very also strange and interesting design, obviously giving very villainous. Love the skirt. I mean, it's pretty much just like a skirt, and that fitted kind of top. It just is an interesting silhouette, especially in combination and complement to his hairstyle. It just gives, it really signifies the shadow component, I think, to this installment and this like little mini series. So that's just really what stood out to me on top of his interesting eye color. But then we move into XD with Michael being our lead, and he's definitely giving us more of that. I'd say even that kind of Digimon world ends with you type style, a little more simple, but we still get some kind of nice accessories. It feels a little more urban, a little more down to earth and street style. I love his kind of headband and how that leads into kind of the lens that is able to detect the shadow Pokemon. I love the kind of belt in the pouch. Again, it's just simple, but it's very well put together. Didn't really want to talk about his little sister because there really wasn't much going on there, but his mom, love it. Like, her jacket is so cute. It just looks so clean, polished, clean, professional. Love a double-breasted jacket in general, and I just think cute and clean, simple. All right, I thought about how to cover all of these because they look very similar to each other. Pretty much the Cypher grunt aesthetic, and various admins or peons have that same style. And we can even see it evolved from the Colosseum game into XD. When we look at Colosseum, it's almost giving a little bit of like Power Ranger kind of vibe with their overall aesthetic. You have them in various colors. You even have one that looks like Mirror Bee. He's called Miracle Bee. And I love how in Colosseum they kind of played on like the names like Verde, Bluno, Rosso. So I just thought that was a little creative, but very similar, like nothing too distinctive outside of color. And I think that the evolution of the kind of grunts into XD really just took more of like a space station twist, just really made it a little more futuristic. Like the Hexagon brothers are really just the grunts just in distinct different colors. I would imagine that must have just been done to maybe some character design shortcuts or just kind of streamlining and optimizing the process. And then you have Naps, who just looks like a slightly elevated, evolved form of that, with a little more of that, like that scarf or necktie or whatever decoration that is, with a slightly more evolved uniform with the shoulder pads and the helmet. But otherwise, I like the consistency. I would say, like, compared to the other grunts across the mainline games, they would be a top pick just because very well coordinated, consistent. There is some evolution between installments. Next, I want to talk about Grievel and his sons, Eldest and Ardos, just because I feel like they are very well coordinated. As far as color, we have red, blue, and purple. The garments that they wear feel very similar. So I just really like that there's that tight, and they're his bodyguards. So it's a very clear relationship, tight coordination. And I just feel like their overall aesthetic gives also a little bit of that kind of like space station, Star Trek villain type energy, especially just like with the glasses that they wear. So it just was a very, very memorable. I think that that's a strong key when you do character design. But let's talk about Lovrina. I love the kind of cutesy pink bubblegum girl, typically most times from games. And speaking of Space Channel 5, she pretty much reminds me a little bit of like Ooh La La from Space Channel 5, just with longer pigtails. But the overall like outfit is definitely giving a little bit of that kind of futuristic space style energy. Is there much going on with her outfit? No, but it's just especially compared to the other characters, very distinctive design. Love the long pink pigtails, goggle situation, tall boots, stockings, feels elevated, simple, chic. Very biased, but one of my favorite characters. But I had to save the best for last because I already know people are checking up on Mayor B for these installments, obviously, and he inspired my outfit for today. Let's talk about his evolution because I love the bit of range that we get from him, and we would expect a fashionista like him to give us multiple looks. Starting in Colosseum, the suit is so camp. The like yellowish goldish suit, and then even just the afro is like, let's just start there, the Pokeball afro, but especially just in combination with the outfit from Colosseum, it's giving disco. He's very much a disco, good energy vibe, even if a villain for a moment, and I just love the flair, the flamboyance, and the style. Absolutely. Main character, he is serving it with the accessorizing, with the details, with the fashion. But I love in XD how it's a little more simplified and refined, but still as statement, with the jacket being opened. Let me see if I can get it real quick. With the jacket being opened and then the yellow scarf, we get a nice strong gold star belt buckle detail, and I think he's even wearing some earrings, and I love how those yellow elements coordinate well with the bottom of his boots. And I think they're like even heeled boots in general, like just simple style choices to make him the icon. One aside from like maybe Wes, the icon of the Colosseum and XD installments. Thank you so much for sticking with me through this little adventure and trip down memory lane in the Orre region. More Pokemon to come after this, obviously, after revisiting some other things, but until the next video, I'll talk to you later.